Gildan Media presents Your Coach in a Box, affordable, life-changing audio programs.
The 7 Laws of Magical Thinking, How Irrational Beliefs Keep Us Happy, Healthy, and Sane, by Matthew Hutson. Narrated by Don Hagen.
Introduction. In April 2009, the leaders of a powerful clan presided over a ceremony on the grounds of their new house of worship. The clan's warriors, known for their fickleness and inconsistency, their success against other tribes depending to a large degree on luck, worried that an adversary had placed a curse on their home turf. Someone had hidden a significant artifact, a symbol of their sworn enemy, under the premises. The American media, typically dismissive of voodoo, had a field day with this little rite. As journalists looked on, 2 men friendly to the warriors pulled the offending relic from the ground and raised it high. Flashbulbs illuminated a ragged piece of cloth, clearly reading the number 34 and the name Ortiz. The new Yankee Stadium had been cleansed. Why should we, an enlightened society, largely adhering to the rigors of science, care so much about a shirt buried in concrete by a construction worker? And why would the president of the Yankees threaten that worker with legal action and demand recompense for the cost of replacing the concrete? The Red Sox jersey itself posed no structural threat to the stadium, so how could that worker, quote, force the Yankees to dig it up? Because magical powers were attributed to that jersey. We'll revisit Yankee Stadium in Chapter 2. Most of the world is religious, and millions more are openly superstitious, spiritual, or credulous of the paranormal. But in this book, I argue that we all believe in magic. Luck, mind over matter, destiny, jinxes, life after death, evil, and heavenly helpers, even when we say we don't. Magical thinking can be quite banal. We find occult meaning in the world all around us, every day. Do you own any sentimental objects, say a wedding ring, a family heirloom, or an autographed baseball? Objects you'd value more than an identical duplicate? That's magical thinking. Do you feel that what goes around comes around through some universal principle of fairness? That's magical thinking. Do you yell at your laptop when it erases your files? Magical thinking. Do you hope to leave a legacy after you die? Magical thinking. Do you believe that certain events were meant to happen? Magical thinking. Or that you can lift your arm through the power of your conscious thoughts? Magical thinking, even that. As you will see, those examples all derive from our ongoing flirtation with supernaturalism, a relationship we depend on for our very survival. Giving up the ghost. For the first 10 years of my life, I went to church every week with my family. Not by choice. I found it boring, and I hated getting up early and wearing uncomfortable clothes. But we got donuts in Sunday school. I enjoyed a modest version of stardom as a member of the choir, and I was allowed to spend sermons drawing tanks and fighter planes blowing up the illustration of the church on the cover of the program. And I did believe in and fear God. I hated being alone with him in the empty chapel. It gave me goosebumps. For a time I refused to say the word God, and would spell it out. I even wrote it G-O-D. But things changed around 4th grade, when I discovered a copy of A Brief History of Time by Stephen Hawking on my parents' bedroom floor. I read his portrayal of the evolution of the universe, first with my father and then on my own, and saw that the capital B big questions could be answered, or at least approached, by science. God made less and less sense. I found more books on the Big Bang and the fabric of space-time, and abandoned my belief in a personal creator, but not my obsession with him. I became a strident young atheist, eager to debate anyone who stooped to have faith in an invisible guide. In the copy of Why I Am Not a Christian by the British philosopher Bertrand Russell that I purchased for pleasure reading in middle school, I underlined passages such as, quote, "It would seem, therefore, that the 3 human impulses embodied in religion are fear, conceit, and hatred," unquote. I struggled to understand humanity's unshakable hold on magical beliefs. its stock in miracles, gods, a soul, against all reason. That's just it. Faith is unreasonable. It's an emotional reaction. But shouldn't reason triumph in deciphering the workings of the universe? Why cry out for a daddy in the sky to explain things and keep you safe? I have Freudian interpretations of my conversion too, but I'll save those for therapy. In my Vulcan mindset, I looked down on the religious as stupid or weak or both. But I knew too many smart, admirable people who went to church. Besides, I never converted anyone to atheism using logic. So I decided to chillax and pay more attention to what irrational beliefs did for people. 5 billion faithful can't be wrong. And I realized in myself a continued need for something more. My teen years were dark, and I often thought that life would be easier were I not an atheist. I looked for slivers of evidence to let me believe that we are not simply mortal, finite, arbitrary collections of organic molecules. I read Synchronicity, in which the physicist F. David Pete tries to ground Carl Jung's ideas about meaningful coincidences in the world of quantum mechanics. I read The Physics of Immortality, in which the physicist Frank Tipler proposes that our descendants will use computers to recreate all previous humans and continue our existences in a virtual heaven. And I read The Archaic Revival, in which the ethnobotanist Terence McKenna considers psychedelics a window into higher dimensions. Naturally, I also tested some of those windows. And here is something I've never told anyone before. For a couple years after giving up God, I still occasionally prayed at night, sending my thoughts out into the vast ether. I really, really wanted to believe in magic. In parallel with my search for meaning was the pursuit of the meaning of meaning, which led me from physics to psychology. We can't interact with reality directly, and in fact can't even be sure it exists. We experience it only through the filter of our own consciousness. What you see, hear, taste, and touch is all a subjective construction in your brain based on sensory input, or a neural jack, as in The Matrix. I decided the closest I could come to understanding the ultimate nature of reality was to understand how the mind creates it. In college, I set out to design an independent major in consciousness studies before settling on cognitive neuroscience, the rigorous analysis of the interface between matter and mind, existence and experience. That pursuit has led me here. I can't, of course, provide for you the meaning of life, and might even speak dismissively, though not derisively, of the meaning you already hold dear. But I'm not ruining Christmas just for fun. And, arguably, I'm not ruining Christmas at all. Telling people why they're biased to believe in Rudolph says nothing about Rudolph's actual existence. I'm dissecting the sacred because the same magical thinking that leads to sentimentality, altruism, and self-efficacy can also lead to vilification, fatalism, and irrational exuberance, or even depression, obsessive-compulsive disorder, and psychosis. By tearing down everything holy and pointing out the sand it was built on, I'm hoping we can learn how to build meaning back up in constructive ways. I don't want to eradicate magical thinking. I want to harness it. The rationality of irrationality. Far from a sign of stupidity or weakness, magical thinking exemplifies many of the habits of mind that made humans so evolutionarily successful. Once you've accepted that the brain constructs reality, and that the brain has evolved, like any other organ, to help its owner survive and reproduce, it follows that the brain constructs reality in the most useful way possible for its owner. The key word here is useful, which is not to say accurate. The brain doesn't care so much what's really out there. It just needs to stay alive and be replicated, which might involve telling us a white lie now and again. Over the past several decades, psychologists have documented a litany of cognitive biases, consistent misperceptions of the world, and explained their positive functions. For example, in the social realm, men overestimate sexual interest from women because the cost of hitting on someone and receiving a brush off is small compared to the benefit of scoring and spreading one's seed. A drink in the face is temporary, but a carrier for your genes lasts generations. And superstitious rituals, such as crossing fingers, may result from believing we have more control over the world than we actually do. a bias that prevents counterproductive feelings of helplessness. The behavioral economist Dan Ariely, who has designed many clever studies to tease out our biases, calls the human mind predictably irrational. Alternatively, the evolutionary psychologist Marty Hazelton and her colleagues have written that, quote, the mind is best described as adaptively rational, equipped with mechanisms that are constrained and sometimes imprecise, but nevertheless clear products of natural selection showing evidence of good design, unquote. This design comprises two distinct levels of processing. The rational system is slow, deliberate, abstract, and logical. The intuitive system is quick, automatic, associative, and emotional. We have the second system to thank for magical thinking. Thinking and belief, as I use the terms in this book, include biases and intimations and feelings, mere whiffs and glimmers of thought. If you think conscious deliberation drives the car, you are ignoring the vast engine block beneath the hood at your own peril. We run largely on autopilot, and overthinking things, as I and many others are wont to do, can funk up the works. For example, when an injury disconnects emotional brain centers from neural areas responsible for higher cognition, patients can't listen to their guts and have trouble making even simple decisions. Recall the millipede who was asked how he knows which leg to move next and immediately froze. Sometimes intuitive thinking just gets the job done. And, as we'll see, magical thinking is not merely an eccentric extension of healthy biases and shortcuts. It can provide benefits of its own. Most prominently, it offers a sense of control and a sense of meaning, making life richer, more comprehensible, and less scary. Often, the biologically modern deliberative system is powerless to restrain the ancient associative system it's built on. It makes no difference how clever you are or how reasonable you try to be. Research shows little correlation between people's levels of rationality or intelligence and their susceptibility to magical thinking. I know knocking on wood has no mystical power, but my instincts tell me to do it anyway, just in case, and I do. A possibly apocryphal tale has the legendary physicist Niels Bohr responding to a friend's inquiry about the horseshoe he'd hung above his door. "Oh, I don't believe in it, but I am told it works even if you don't." I'd say he was channeling Yogi Berra if they hadn't been contemporaries. There are many layers to belief, the psychologist Carol Nemiroff, who has studied magical thinking extensively, told me. And the answer for many people, especially with regard to magic, is, most of me doesn't believe, but some of me does. Longings and wisdom. Magic. The very word seems to reveal a world of mysterious and unexpected possibilities, the Polish anthropologist Bronislaw Malinowski wrote in 1925. Even for the clear scientific mind, the subject of magic has a special attraction, partly perhaps because we hope to find in it the quintessence of primitive man's longings and of his wisdom, and that, whatever it might be, is worth knowing. Partly because magic seems to stir up in everyone some hidden mental forces, some lingering hopes in the miraculous, some dormant beliefs in man's mysterious possibilities. Malinowski spent several years in the Southwest Pacific studying the magical practices of, quote, primitive man. Much of today's scholarship on magic derives from the anthropological efforts of the late 19th and early 20th centuries, in which the traditions of Bushmen and remote islanders were catalogued and scrutinized. Psychologists, sociologists, and historians have still not agreed upon what counts as magic versus religion versus science versus technology. There's plenty of overlap. Magic and religion both deal with the spiritual realm. Magic and science both deal with uncovering hidden patterns in the world. And magic and technology both deal with mastering one's environment. Quote, although the word magic is common in both scholarly and lay discourse, the psychologists Carol Nemiroff and Paul Rosen have written, the variety of things to which it refers is far-reaching, ranging from a social institution characteristic of traditional societies to sleight of hand or parlor tricks, to belief in unconventional phenomena such as UFOs and ESP, to sloppy thinking or false beliefs, and even a state of romance, wonder, or the mysterious. One must at least entertain the possibility that there's no true category here at all. Instead, the term magic in current usage has become a label for a residual category, a garbage bin filled with various odds and ends that we do not otherwise know what to do with." Unquote. There is a common thread that holds together many of the things we tend to call magic and excludes many of the things we don't. One recurring theme in the literature, a theme I'm taking as the basis for my definition of magical thinking, is what the anthropologist Richard Schweiter calls a confusion of subjectivity and objectivity, and what the anthropologist Claude Lévi-Strauss called the anthropomorphism of nature and the physiomorphism of man. There's the world of the mind, defined by intention and conscious experience, and the world of outside reality, defined by matter and deterministic forces. But we instinctively treat the mind as though it had physical properties, and we treat the physical world as though it had mental properties. That's magical thinking. We perceive mind and matter mingling together, working on the same wavelength. The psychologist Marjana Lindemann similarly defines magical thinking as, quote, category mistakes where the core attributes of mental, physical, and biological entities and processes are confused with each other, and has collected evidence linking these category mistakes under one umbrella. She and collaborators found that people who describe phrases such as, old furniture knows things about the past, or an evil thought is contaminated, or when summer is warm, flowers want to bloom, as more than metaphor, also believe in feng shui and astrology, i.e., that the arrangement of furniture or stars can channel life energy. They see more purpose in natural and random events, and they're more likely to be religious and hold paranormal beliefs. One advantage of defining magical thinking as the mingling of psychological concepts with physical ones, rather than simply as holding beliefs that contradict scientific consensus, is that what counts as magical thinking is less prone to change as we learn more about the world. We now know that our planet is a sphere, but learning that it has a personality would constitute a revolution an order of magnitude larger. The current definition also distinguishes magical thinking from everyday false beliefs, such as the notion that toilets tend to flush clockwise in the southern hemisphere, or that toilet seats transmit HIV, and it distinguishes it from common biases and states of mind such as germ phobia and wishful thinking, and also from credence in possible but unlikely phenomena such as Bigfoot's existence and alien authorship of crop circles. The agenda. With our promiscuous mixing of the mental and physical realms, it's hard to break magical thinking into distinct laws, but I've tried. Someone else might divide the material differently than I have, with different laws or more laws or fewer. And things I call magical thinking, someone else might dismiss as run-of-the-mill irrationality. Surely I'll also make what some consider omissions. I've tried to take a consistent approach in mapping the terrain, but the borders remain debatable. Here's a rough guide. In Chapter 1, Objects Carry Essences, we'll explore how everyday items become emotionally significant by taking on the spirit of their previous owners or unique pasts. In Chapter 2, Symbols Have Power, we'll see that we confuse symbolic associations in our heads for causal relationships in the world. Chapter 3, Actions Have Distant Consequences, takes up superstitious rituals and our attempts to channel luck through physical acts. Chapter 4, The Mind Knows No Bounds, covers belief in mind over matter and extrasensory perception, as well as transcendent experiences. In Chapter 5, The Soul Lives On, we'll look at how hard it is to believe that your mind dies when your body does. In Chapter 6, The World is Alive, we'll see that we often treat inanimate objects as conscious. Chapter 7, Everything Happens for a Reason, analyzes our insistence that higher powers guide natural events. Finally, the epilogue explores ways to find meaning in life by treating the world as sacred. For the most part, I don't cover explicit and culturally transmitted beliefs in religion, magic, and the paranormal. Plenty of excellent books exist on those. I'm more interested in our shadow beliefs, those inklings of the numinous that we deny, and beliefs that we don't even recognize as magical. These habits of mind guide us through the world every day. In very basic ways, they provide a sense of control, of purpose, of connection, and of meaning. And without them, we couldn't function. So here's my gauntlet. Even if you're a hardcore skeptic who walks under ladders and pronounces New Age like sewage, you believe in magic. and that's nothing to be ashamed of.
1. Objects carry essences: cooties, contagion, and historicity. Years after his death, John Lennon went on tour. He visited, among other locations, Oklahoma City, Waco, New Orleans, and Virginia Tech, spreading a message of peace and love at the sites of tragic events. You may not have recognized him, though, covered in scars and cigarette burns, but to hear him there would have been no mistaking his presence. On this journey, Lennon assumed the form of a piano, specifically the one on which he composed Imagine. It gives off his spirit and what he believed in, and what he preached for many years, says Carolyn True, the tour director and a colleague of the Steinway's current owner, the singer George Michael. Free of velvet ropes, it could be touched or played by anyone. According to Libra Legrone, whose home was destroyed by Hurricane Katrina, being with the piano was like sleeping in your grandpa's sweatshirt at night, familiar, beautiful, and personal. Legrone didn't know who John Lennon was at age 5, but maintains a flashbulb memory of his death on December 8, 1980. We were decorating our Christmas tree the day he was shot. I remember I was standing on a little step-ladder, putting tinsel on the tree, and my mom sat down in front of the television and started to cry. I have a very, very close family. My mom is truly my best friend in the world, and has been my whole life. So to see my mom sit down and cry over someone, it was like, okay, who is this guy? I'm going to love him, aren't I? Growing up, he became a really important part of my life. On Friday, August 26, 2005, Legrone helped her ex-boyfriend move his stuff out of her house in New Orleans. They'd been dating for 6 years and had broken up 3 days earlier. She was also caring for a cat who'd undergone intensive surgery for cancer. Understandably, she went out on the town that night to see a band with some college friends and blow off steam. After returning home in the wee hours, she woke up at 8 a.m. to an incessantly ringing phone. Everyone was calling her to tell her to get out of the city. A hurricane was coming. I put my cats, dogs, me, a pair of jeans, a pair of flip-flops, and a Clash T-shirt in my car and drove to my aunt and uncle's house in Baton Rouge, she says. Legrone would live there for several months. I lost everything. Less than a month after Katrina came to town, Hurricane Rita paid a visit, and Legrone's grandparents also evacuated to Legrone's aunt and uncle's house. Her grandmother had a stroke. After an extended stay in the ICU, they let her pass. Legrone's grandfather followed soon after. While her mother dealt with the aftermath, her father slipped, hit his head, and suffered a brain hemorrhage. Then both of Legrone's cats died, and she was held up at gunpoint. It was a rough year and a half. You can imagine the look on Legrone's face in May 2007 when a woman showed up to the Ogden Museum of Southern Art, where Legrone worked, with a strange offer. When she approached me, she said, "Hey, I'm Caroline True. I'm taking John Lennon's piano around the country to different places that have been struck by devastation." True wanted to set the piano up at the museum so people could interact with it. Well, I didn't really believe her at first. I was like, okay, you're here to tell me you have the piano that John Lennon wrote the song Imagine on in a truck in front of the museum right now. Sure, whatever, sweetheart. Legrone ran upstairs, Googled True, and realized she was the real deal. How would you react if someone showed up at your doorstep with a personal belonging of one of your heroes? Chances are you'd get a little weak-kneed, or at least become intrigued. You'd have to be pretty cold to say, "So what? I've seen a piano before." We all have objects we fetishize, or at least take a fancy to for personal reasons. Think of a child's blankie, a wedding ring, an autographed album. What's more human than sentimentality? And yet sentimentality for particular objects is just as illogical as belief in ghosts. Nevertheless, you wouldn't be happy with replicas of sacred items, even if the replica was identical in every way. Somehow, two things can be physically identical, and yet the original has something else, a non-physical presence, a special significance beyond the realm of physics or chemistry. How is it that an object, such as Lenin's Steinway, can carry meaning around with it, independent of its material composition? To attribute personal value, a subjective property, to a lump of atoms, that's magical thinking. Historicity. Like most forms of magical thinking, feeling the power of unique objects appears to come naturally. When scientists want to understand why people think the way they do, particularly when they want to separate nature from nurture, they often look to young children. If you're trying to grasp the evolutionary origins of human thought and behavior, kids, relatively untouched by modern cultural indoctrination, are the next best things to cavemen. So when a scientist wants to know what types of ideas people naturally accommodate, or reject as impossible or inane, he will sometimes try telling tall tales to pristine minds and see if they'll buy it. What kind of a scientist lies to a child? Well, the developmental psychologists Bruce Hood of the University of Bristol and Paul Bloom of Yale are two of the most practiced kitty con men out there, and they have one clever set of experiments that serves our case here very well. First, they rigged up a copying machine capable of duplicating objects placed inside, really just two boxes spruced up with lights and buzzers and placed in front of a black curtain. Then they invited parents to bring their 3 to 6-year-olds into the lab along with one of their kids' toys, dolls, or blankets. Half of the objects were considered attachment objects, meaning the kids were especially possessive of them and used them for self-soothing. To demonstrate their machine's powers, Hood and Bloom placed various items in one box, closed the lid, snuck a duplicate into the other box from behind, then opened them both up. None of the kids accused the scientists of shenanigans. The kids were then invited to place their own item in the machine and asked whether they would want to take home the original or the copy. Of the children with the non-attachment items, 62% chose the duplicate. Of the children with the attachment items, only 23% chose the copy, and 20% refused to put their beloved toy in the machine at all. Are kids, like adults, suckers for the celeb worship by which objects can be important just because they're owned by famous people? Apparently. Hood and Bloom next duplicated metal spoons and cups and asked 6-year-olds to rate whether they liked the original or the copy more. In one case, they told the kids that the items were made of precious metal. 82% valued the two items equally, so it seems that they bought that the items were materially identical. In the other case, the kids were told that the original items had been owned by Queen Elizabeth II. Compared with the first case, more than 3 times as many kids preferred the original. So somehow, mere ownership by a queen lends the metal additional worth. I asked Legrone if she would have been content with a reproduction of Lenin's piano. Maybe it's just a trick that your mind plays on you, that, wow, it was really there with Lenin. But no, I would not have felt the same if it was a replica. In his book, The Man in the High Castle, Philip K. Dick uses the term historicity to describe the intangible worth of collectibles. One character holds up 2 cigarette lighters and says historicity is when a thing has history in it. Listen, one of those 2 Zippo lighters was in Franklin D. Roosevelt's pocket when he was assassinated, and one wasn't. One has historicity, a hell of a lot of it, as much as any object ever had, and one has nothing. Can you feel it? He nudged her. You can't. You can't tell which is which. Instead of historicity, psychologists often use the term authenticity to describe the invisible value an object gains from its provenance. Recently, 4 researchers, Susan Gelman and Brandy Fraser at the University of Michigan, and Bruce Hood and Alice Wilson at the University of Bristol, explored adults' evaluation of authentic objects in the lab. Subjects compared authentic and inauthentic items within 4 different categories of authenticity. There were original creations, for example, the very first light bulb versus an everyday bulb, Objects associated with famous people or events.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?